Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start in the next minute. Good morning to our delegates online as well. Right. Good morning, everybody. We are now going to start the meeting, and I invite our online participants to also join us. So, distinguished guests, our keynote speaker, Lieutenant General Lebeya, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure on behalf of the conference organizers, the Department of Public Service and Administration, the Financial Intelligence Center, the Open Government Partnership, Corruption Watch, and Open Ownership, to welcome you to this two-day conference themed Collective Action for Beneficial Ownership Transparency in South Africa, from Commitment to Action. My name is Karabo Rajweli, the Director of Programs at Open Ownership, and I'll be standing in for the Program Director Nkateko Chauke today. In planning this conference over the last few months, it has quickly become evident how timely this convening is for a multitude of stakeholders. This has been demonstrated by the overwhelming response we've received from speakers as well as participants across government, law enforcement, the private sector, civil society, as well as academia. We are joined by over 150 guests online and delegates in Cape Town numbering over 50 in Cape Town. What we know about this topic is that globally, anonymous companies remain the major obstacle to fighting corruption as well as money laundering. They both enable corruption and criminal actors to hide behind a chain of companies registered in multiple jurisdictions. A study by the World Bank found that in several grand corruption cases, in 70% of those instances, anonymous shell companies were at the heart of them. An expert on beneficial ownership who is at this conference today has pointed out that the risk created by anonymous shell companies is a network problem, and the solution requires a network. The conference being held during the Open Government Week takes on that call for a multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder approach to the problem of anonymous companies in South Africa, and then to unlock the benefits of transparency. The design of the program is intended to enhance the understanding of beneficial ownership among multi-stakeholders in South Africa and make practical recommendations for a multi-stakeholder roadmap for implementation. We therefore ask that the discussion and deliberations today be kept constructive, interactive, and collegial. We also trust that the enthusiasm in the response to this conference is matched by the concrete action points at the end of this conference. Now on to the practicalities. For the in-person delegates today, here in Cape Town today, the conference team will be on hand throughout the conference for any questions or requests that you may have. Rosemary from Solutions Group, who you'd have met at the name tag registration desk, as well as her team, will be on hand to answer any travel, registration, or bookings through the hotel. The rest of the conference team, who you might have met as well at the registration table, will be on hand on any other matters, as well as any facilities that you require throughout the conference, including the location of the restrooms, which are directly out the door to your left-hand side. For our online delegates, Rosemary, as well as the conference team, will be on hand for any technical issues you may have with the Zoom link. Our email addresses will be reshared in the meeting link so that you can contact us directly. In keeping with COVID protocols, we do ask that during sessions, masks are kept on and that delegates regularly sanitize as well as keep social distancing. I'm told by our communications experts that there are hashtags for this conference. They are as follows: hashtag follow the money, hashtag beneficial ownership SA, and hashtag FATF in SA. To keep the conference engaging and interactive throughout, we'll be using an online platform called Slido, which I'll talk you through now, which give me a moment to change screens. For Nick, if you could just. Open and then share screen. Right, thank you so much. Okay. Can we do this after the presentation? Thanks. Right, so this is an opportunity where you are allowed to take out your cell phones during a conference. If you could join me at slido.com and enter in the conference code, which is 1316029. And this is for the online delegates as well. Once you've logged into slido.com, I can see those of you using QR codes as well, which is excellent. Right. So the first task is to answer the quiz. Okay. First question, what city are you in today?
Administration and the DG for the DPSA, or Department of Public Service and Administration. I wish to welcome you all to this, to the fairest Cape of all, our beautiful mother city. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome you to the Beneficial Ownership Multi-Stakeholder Conference, co-hosted by the DPSA and the Financial Intelligence Center, Open Government Partnership, Open Ownership, and Corruption Watch. Also, a special word of thanks to our sponsors, the British High Commission, Open Government Partnership, Open Ownership, and Corruption Watch, for their generous contributions towards making this conference possible also in a hybrid format. This multi-stakeholder conference takes place at a time where concerns about the high levels of corruption in South Africa are real. And successful investigations and prosecutions of corruption cases depends heavily on access to timely, accurate, and verified beneficial ownership information, especially where elaborate networks are established to hide process. Global attention also turned to ownership and control of illicit assets, and the use of legal structures to conceal them. This includes the use of legal persons and arrangements to distance the beneficial owner from an asset through complex chains of ownership. Moving forward as a country, one of the means South Africa can apply to address the scourge of corruption is financial ownership transparency. This is already an objective in the anti-corruption task team, but also that of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Esteemed guests, Fighting corruption remains a priority of government, with President Ramaphosa reiterating in the 2022 State of the Nation address that government is taking decisive steps to expose and punish corrupt activities. This requires of all government departments and all of society to take action and to take hands. When we as a collective take hands, the fruit of our fight will be a capable, ethical, and developmental state. It is clear to me that as government, the civil society, and as South Africans, we are indeed unified in our commitment to address beneficial ownership transparency. This is evident when looking at the presence of senior officials from both government and civil society at this event. But it's also reflected in the theme for the multi-stakeholder conference, collective action for beneficial ownership transparency in South Africa, from commitment to implementation. Over the past decade, the DPSA and the Financial Intelligence Center, FIC, played a major role as champions and contributors in shaping the beneficial ownership discourse. And they are also contributors in shaping the beneficial ownership discourse and agenda from the perspective of shaping and transforming the evolving beneficial ownership transparency legislative and policy framework in South Africa, but also as co-chairs and technical leads, together with a number of primary implementing agencies comprising the Interdepartmental Committee on Beneficial Ownership Transparency. This Interdepartmental Committee on Beneficial Ownership Transparency was established in 2015 under the auspices of the DPSA, following the adoption of a set of high-level principles on beneficial ownership transparency by the Group of 20, and subsequent approval thereof by Cabinet. In the Interdepartmental Committee on Beneficial Ownership Transparency, the FIC, together with implementing agencies such as the Companies Registrar, as well as the South African Revenue Service, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, the Master of the High Court, the Department of Social Development, and the Deeds Registrar formed dedicated work streams in focusing and addressing issues relating to legislative and technological harmonization. From 2021, the Interdepartmental Committee reports directly, as per Cabinet decision, to the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Finance Interdepartmental Committee, that is chaired by the Director General of the National Treasury. The FIC also leads the Subcommittee on Legislative Review, which reports to the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Financing Interdepartmental Committee. Now, coordination of our effort as country does not only take place at government level. Together with Corruption Watch as the civil society lead, the FIC is responsible for the coordination of the Open Government Partnership National Action Plan on the implementation of beneficial ownership transparency. With these necessary structures in place, the time is now ready for us as a collective to accelerate implementation. The objective of this multi-stakeholder conference is therefore to frame beneficial ownership implementation and anti-corruption in South Africa, to provide an overview of the beneficial ownership transparency agenda in South Africa, and as a collective, to look at possible solutions. Over the next 2 days, we will do exactly that by first positioning the role of government, civil society, and the private sector in actioning South Africa's commitments in beneficial ownership transparency. Secondly, by examining the scale of the problem associated with beneficial ownership from different sectoral perspectives. And thirdly, by contextualizing the beneficial ownership transparency agenda in South Africa within global development on beneficial ownership transparency. It is this overarching objective of the multi-stakeholder conference to get one step closer to develop a national integrated and harmonized beneficial ownership roadmap and practical implementation framework agreed to by all stakeholders. This will protect the integrity of South Africa's financial system, especially by mitigating money laundering risks, and it will support the criminal justice system so that investigations and prosecutions can be conducted swiftly through tangible and demonstrable results. To conclude, I invite you to debate, to interrogate, and above all, to contribute to finding solutions in ensuring beneficial ownership transparency implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone for joining us today for the next 2 days. Again, as the previous speaker, I'll be speaking without my mask because with the fogging on my glasses. Yeah, I would like to thank Corruption Watch, the FIC, DPSA, and the Open Ownership for inviting me to speak today, and also for the partnership that we have built together over the last couple of years to advance, the principles of open government, but also of beneficial ownership transparency in South Africa. And I think as Karabo spoke earlier, this event is happening during the Open Government Week. The Open Government Week is a week that is dedicated, a full week that is dedicated globally, where debates and discussions happen in terms of how do we transform governments to be better at serving citizens and improving citizen lives through open government approaches. So I think this is one of the events that are happening globally that are discussing how to improve, to transform how governments serve citizens. And the Open Government Partnership is a global partnership of 78 countries, including 76 local governments that work with civil society to advance the principles of transparency, accountability, citizen participation. And South Africa is a founding member of this partnership that was in 2011. So we are celebrating 11 years of the partnership this year. So I want to begin, I think, my opening remarks by thanking and applauding the reformers from government, from civil society, from academia, as well as the business, who have championed and led the advancement of beneficial ownership in South Africa for the last 8 to 10 years. I think when you look at, there's a lot of progress that has happened since these, for the last 10 years in terms of advancing beneficial ownership, but much more still needs to be done. And we all know that beneficial ownership now more than ever has become more vital in South Africa. I think when you look at the money laundering national risk assessment, it tells us that 20 to 25% of government procurement annually is lost to corruption, to bribery, and to money laundering. And when we look at, and that is almost about equivalent to 90 billion rands a year that is lost to illicit activities. And even when we look at the reports that are coming out of the Zondo Commission, some very scathing findings are coming out of the Zondo inquiry. So there is never a better time than now. The stakes are higher for us to be able to deal with this, with the challenges that beneficial ownership can address. And why is beneficial ownership important to me? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to your children? Why is it important to government, to law enforcement, to private sector, and to civil society? business plays a very critical role in supporting government in providing services to citizens, may it be building roads, building schools, building clinics, providing food to the needy. It provides a whole range of support to government in terms of providing services. And what we know, and research has told us, that anonymous shell companies are being used by politically exposed individuals and politically exposed people to, that are brought in by government to support government to provide these services. And in most cases, when corrupt activities are happening through anonymous companies, normally it is in providing these services, it is normally at inflated rates. So what we know is that these anonymous companies then are used to siphon money into individual pockets, or sometimes even outside, taking money outside of our country. And I think some of the evidence that has been brought to the Zondo Commission gives a clear reflection of the workings of anonymous shell companies. And beneficial ownership helps us to deter these corrupt activities. And beyond just addressing and deterring and combating corruption, beneficial ownership transparency actually creates a level playing field for businesses, because it is very expensive for the small to medium companies to actually do commercial due diligence. And what beneficial ownership does, it helps and reduces the cost and enables the small to medium companies to also compete for government contracts, to compete in the business sector. So beyond corruption, there is more that beneficial ownership can actually do to improve the business environment. And because of this, these reasons, global institutions have stepped up the prioritization of beneficial ownership transparency. We talk about the G20 principles, we talk about the FATF recommendation 24, we talk about the OECD standards, but also the open ownership principles on beneficial ownership transparency. All these norms call for openness and transparency in company ownership, but also for timely and accessible, accurate information in terms of on beneficial ownership, to deter and to address the corrupt activities that we see. But there are others that go then an extra mile to also call for a publicly accessible register. And I would want to encourage, in the next 2 days, the conversations that are going to be happening, to make sure that, to encourage participants to consider that South Africa begins to move towards developing and implementing a publicly accessible register. At the OGP, we're actually seeing a race to the top from countries that are that are part of the OGP, the 78 countries. We're seeing the race to the top, where, in terms of implementing beneficial ownership, South Africa has joined a set of countries that are implementing these reforms. And there we have Mongolia, we have Nigeria, Ghana, Brazil, Canada, Kenya, and the United Kingdom. And all these countries are moving towards implementing a publicly accessible public register. And I think we will hear about that today for some of the speakers, some of the examples that are coming out, some are coming out of this country. But South Africa is still quite far in terms of coming up with a public register. So it's something that I want to applaud and to encourage these discussions in the next 2 days, to say, how do we come up with a public register in South Africa? How do we begin the process of getting to establish a publicly accessible register? So for the next 2 days, I think the discussions that we'll have in the next 2 days are going to be very important as we collectively advance beneficial ownership, transparency, and reforms in South Africa. And I want to encourage all participants to really take the time to think about what role do you play as an institution, as a sector, to help and support the work that is being carried out by Treasury, by DPSA, by FIC, and the civil society to implement the global commitments that have been made by the government of South Africa, such as the commitments that have been made from the G20 principles, some from FATF, but also within OGP, because there are commitments that have been made, global commitments, and we want to support government to make sure that there is the implementation of those commitments. So finally, in the next 2 days again, let's seize the moment and let's join forces, as in this gathering, so that we can address and end anonymous shell companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Dr. Hogenraad Vermaak and Theo Chiviro. Another round of applause to them. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker today, who probably needs no introduction. And I think this is a really important speaker because you know that when it comes to tackling illicit finance or corruption, law enforcement is at the forefront of this. Our keynote speaker today is Lieutenant General Lebeya, who has got a long history in law enforcement. His profile mentions that he has covered almost every facet of police life in South Africa, from being the first port of call for community service to becoming the Deputy National Commissioner of Crime and Detection of SAPS, the South African Police Services, and now the National Head of the Directorate for the Priority Crime Investigation. He joined the South African Police Services in 1984 as a student, constable, and became the commissioning officer in 1991. In 2000, Lieutenant General Lebeya was appointed as a senior manager with the rank of director, and later assistant commissioner responsible for special investigations and detective services, respectively, in Gauteng. From 2004 to 2009, he was head of organized crime at the police head office. From 2010 until 2011, he was appointed as the divisional commissioner of priority crime investigations within the Directorate of Priority Crime Investigation. The directorate produced a record of 14,793 arrests and 7,037 convictions. He then served as the National Deputy Commissioner of Crime Detection from 2011 to 2016. He also, in addition to all this work, holds the extreme privilege of being an external examiner for law, police, and criminology subjects from junior degrees to doctorate degrees at UNISA, as well as the University of Limpopo. Lieutenant General Lebeya is also currently the chairperson of the Anti-Corruption Task Force, which also is looking at the issue of beneficial ownership transparency. So it is my honor to invite Lieutenant General Lebeya to please come and join me on stage. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Program Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I do not want to mention only few names of those that are mostly working with me in the ACTT. Otherwise, I might discriminate others. I'm observing some of the colleagues that have been sitting with me here on the table that not so long, when you were reading this CV, I was remembering the task that the two of them gave me when they were both in the NPA. The other one wanted me to testify in the matter that has to do with the crime intelligence matters. The other one was acting as the DPP in Gauteng province, but I did testify. And the magistrate made an error in passing judgment, and it took time to have that reversed. Otherwise, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to address you this morning. It is an honor to be afforded an opportunity to address our colleagues in law enforcement, the public and private sector in the world of anti-corruption. The focus of my address to you today will be on the importance of timely access to accurate, adequate, and verified beneficial ownership information from a law enforcement perspective. I'll do this by aiming to outline both the challenges and the benefit to the collection, verification, disclosure, and exchange of beneficial ownership. The information that is normally required for law enforcement to share possible solutions, which is what I'll also highlight in combating corruption through the various programs that have been designed in South Africa, amongst them the establishment of the anti-corruption task team, as well as the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Those I will touch among them. The identification of the true beneficial owners or individuals in exercising control poses a challenge to prosecutors, law enforcement agencies, and intelligence practitioners across the globe. As schemes designed to obscure beneficial ownership continue to be enhanced to appear legitimate, which impairs the ability of financial institutions, professional intermediaries, and competent authorities to identify suspicious activities. The identification of adequate, accurate, current, and reliable information on beneficial ownership is the golden thread that runs through every initiative and regulatory regime seeking to enhance transparency, reduce illicit financial flows, reverse harmful capital flight, and prevent criminals from laundering the proceeds of their criminal activities. Illicit actors misuse legal entities to disguise their true ownership and access financial system anonymously to facilitate money laundering. It also enables corrupt actors to hide their ill-gotten gains and to commit other financial crimes. This lack of transparency hinders law enforcement and other investigations, limiting government's ability to effectively combat money laundering, corruption, and other significant national security threats. Protecting South African financial system from abuse requires collecting beneficial ownership information when an entity is formed and ensuring that law enforcement has access to it. Generally, inadequate implementation of the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, global standard on beneficial ownership transparently for company information and customer due diligence leads to lack of current, accurate, beneficial ownership information. If beneficial ownership information is not readily available, it often requires a time-consuming process to access such information, and this can significantly delay investigations. Investigators may need subpoenas, witness interviews, or even foreign legal assistance to unveil the true ownership of structures of shell or front companies that are associated with serious criminal conduct. This also undermines financial institutions' abilities to determine which of their clients pose compliance risks, which may in turn harm the bank's ability to guard against money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financing such as the proliferation of firearms. There are some solutions which include the effective implementation of the international standard like the FATF standard, which provide in recommendation 24 and 25 that countries should take measures to prevent the misuse of legal persons for money laundering and the terrorist financing. For those in the private sector, the information provided in line with these standards provide greater clarity about the people with whom they are doing business. It enables them to make informed decisions about potential deals or transactions and makes it much easier to manage legal, reputational, political, operational, and regulatory risks. Complex ownership structures can provide a veneer of respectability, hiding potential problematic interests and influence behind the seemingly reputable corporate history of a shell company. This is in particular concern when politically exposed persons hold hidden stakes in a company. From the public sector perspective, access to information on beneficial ownership is essential in order to remove the veil of secrecy and prevent bad actors from maintaining plausible deniability and continuing to operate with impunity. By identifying the natural persons responsible for the underlying activity of concern, this can assist law enforcement, tax authorities, and other competent authorities to follow the money in financial investigation involving suspects' accounts or assets held by corporate vehicles and assist in locating a given person's assets within a jurisdiction.